This week there's an urgent meeting of state and territory energy ministers as inflation pressures mount, fuelled by soaring gas prices and supply issues for eastern states. Energy Minister Chris Bowen has laid the blame with the former coalition government, something rejected by the new opposition leader Peter Dutton. Mr Dutton's newly appointed Shadow Assistant Minister for Climate Change and Energy, Holly Hughes, joins us now from Sydney. Holly Hughes, good morning and congratulations on your shadow portfolio.
Thank you, Michael. Good morning.
I want to step outside of politics and go straight to the Santos boss, Kevin Gallagher. He says that these gas shortages are a consequences, in his words, of more than a decade of energy policy failure. Do you concede the former government should have done a whole lot more to prevent Australians being in the situation they find themselves in at the moment?
Over the past decade, we've certainly seen the Labor Party and the Greens oppose any future investment and development in things like gas, but also when you look at the coal mines, when you're talking about taking coal power plants offline, you're looking at companies that stop doing the maintenance of those power stations, and that's why a lot of them tend to go offline more than they would have had they been correctly maintained, that their early closure dates weren't being enforced. So we've seen a talking down of our natural resources, we've seen a talking down of coal-fired power stations, we've seen an objection from the opposition and the Greens when it came to things like the Kurri Kurri gas plant. So you can't all of a sudden turn around and say, now we want to be friends with the gas companies. When you start to look at what the situation's occurring, this is going to put inflationary pressure on electricity prices, and we already know Australians are doing it tough.
What does it say, though, over the leadership, or looking at the Santos boss's view, the potential lack of leadership from the federal perspective? The federal government was in power for the 9 years that he's talking about.
And look, there's also state responsibilities here. I used to live up in Moree in northwest New South Wales, just up the road from Narrabri, where Santos wanted to develop a coal seam gas in that region, and it was incredibly opposed by the New South Wales state government. So, you know, when you've got those objections coming through from a state level as well, it is difficult to ensure that that supply can be maintained, and looking at new sources of generation.
OK, looking at the climate change area, the day after the election, Simon Birmingham, who's now the Shadow Foreign Affairs Minister, told insiders regarding the former government's target of 26 to 28% cut in emissions by 2030. He reckons the coalition should commit to going further. Should you?
Oh, look, Michael, it's less than 24 hours I've been in this position.
You must have a view, though, Holly Hughes. You've been following this debate quite closely, I know.
I have been following the debate. I'm not personally in favour of us extending that target.
Why is that?
Well, because Australia is 1.3% of the entire global emissions. So we could shut everything down tomorrow and all go live in trees, and at the end of the day, our impact on the global...
I don't think anybody's talking about shutting things down tomorrow.
No, but this is when you start talking about significant emissions increases. You are then looking at what we're doing when it comes to coal, when it comes to gas, and you can't have it both ways. You can't say we want to boost energy supply, but we're going to shut everything down. Renewables are not up to making 100% transfer. That is just not possible at this stage. The technology is catching up. We've seen lithium-ion batteries are now being developed in the Hunter region. We're seeing that there are changes in nuclear small modular, which we need to potentially look at that. So there are changes, there are technology that are coming through, but I think to legislate some of these changes is putting it in the hands of bureaucrats, not the scientists. And we want to make sure that it's scientists that are looking at the technology, not bureaucrats and not politicians. And that's the danger when you start talking about legislating these sorts of emission cuts.
OK, but a lot of voters, in fact most voters, took a different view, endorsing clearly the Labor Party. They won a pretty thumping victory.
32% of Australians endorsed the Labor Party.
Well, 77 seats versus less than 60 for the coalition.
32% of the vote.
It's a pretty thumping win in anybody's minds.
32% of the vote with two-seat majority.
The Greens have a much bigger emissions reduction target. The Teal Independents, most of them, more so than the Labor Party. Do you take any message at all from voters regarding climate change?
I think climate change was something that a lot of voters were focused on, but I think what's going to happen as you move forward and people start to get inflationary pressures, start to see their mortgage rates increase, they start to see this increased spending by this new Labor government that's going to put pressure on our AAA credit rating, which does flow through the economy then. And when you look at increased power prices, some of those issues that were looked at as sort of their you know, they're almost like a luxury issue for some people, because people of Wentworth probably aren't going to the petrol bowser and looking at those numbers tick over, whereas I can tell you the people out in Cabramatta are very much looking at those numbers tick over when they're at the bowser. So those cost of living pressures are going to have a very significant impact on voters' intentions, I think, going forward.
OK, while we're talking percentages, 6%, that's the percentage of Liberal women in the 151-member House of Representatives. It's clearly not a great outcome, is it?
Wow, your maths are better than mine. I haven't sat down and done that number yet, and we don't have a final makeup of the Senate.
Well, it's not 9 at this stage, not 9 Liberal women in a House of 151 members. What does that say to you? What has the Liberal Party got so wrong in terms of recruiting women to run for politics?
Well, that's the House of Representatives. I'm sitting in the Senate, and we are very well represented in the Senate and got some fantastic Liberal women in the Senate. In the House of Representatives, I think we have to do better at putting women into seats that are what you would consider safer seats. I do think we have a lot of women who run in marginal seats that, as you've seen, we've lost government, so obviously we've lost seats. So with that, we have lost a lot of really good women.
Do you back quotas?
Do you back
quotas as a way of improving the situation for the Liberal Party?
Look, I've oscillated on this. I was never a fan of quotas previously. I did start to think maybe we needed to look at something. That said, I do think the Liberal Party, when you look at the Senate, which is, you know, when people run for the Senate, they do tend to have a long history in the party. We do have a very, very strong group of women in the Senate from the Liberal Party. As I said, I would like to see more women running in safer seats rather than those marginal seats that do tend to change when you have a change of government. But you've also got a situation when you look at some of the seats that the Liberal Party lost. If you look at Celia Hammond over in Curtin, Curtin would have been considered previously a pretty safe seat, yet we've lost Celia in that over in WA. We've also got people, though, like Melissa McIntosh, who's also been elevated yesterday, but Mel actually got a swing to her in the seat of Lindsay's. So, you know, it's always a bit swings and roundabouts when it comes to politics and elections. Would like to see more women in safe seats, but, you know, what's a safe seat these days? I think this election's just shown us, you know, they can change it on a whim.
It's a very different political landscape, that's for sure. Senator Holly Hughes, appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Michael.